Thank you everybody for coming out. I'm Brielle, a renting artist here at McGuffey Art Center. We're so excited to be able to share this virtual poetry reading with you. Oh, it's not a poetry reading, an artist talk, sorry. With you through McGuffey Art Center. McGuffey is located in a historic elementary school building in downtown Charlottesville and is one of the oldest artist-run cooperatives in the country. The Art Center is a community of artists dedicated to practicing art and passing on the creative spirit to the greater Charlottesville community through creating opportunities for increasing access to art for all. We are so happy to have you here today for the artist talk with some of the artists participating in Water, the Agony and Ecstasy of the Black Experience. Joining us today are Sahara Clemons, Clinton Helms, Leslie Lillard, Benita Mayo, Kweisi Morris, Kori Price, Benford D. Stellmacher Jr., Derrick J. Marley Nichelle, and Veronica Jackson. During this talk, each artist will speak a little about their creative process and will share some images of the work they've submitted to this exhibition. Three of the artists who will be speaking today were part of the curation team for this show as well. Kori Price, Derrick Waller, and Sahara Clemons, so just so you know. A little bit about the background of the show that is currently hanging at McGuffey. Water, the Agony and Ecstasy of the Black Experience is a multi-medium exhibition curated by the Charlottesville Black Arts Collective, or CBAC, featuring the work of 25 Black artists from the state of Virginia. This exhibition seeks to take viewers through a journey using water as a metaphor for the Black experience. Artists featured in this exhibition were asked to deliver work exploring the interconnection of water and Black life based on prose written by writer and photographer Kori Price. The exhibition is currently on display on all floors of McGuffey Art Center until the end of March 2021. Guests can visit the exhibition in person Wednesday through Sunday, 1 to 5 p.m. and can view the exhibition online at McGuffeyArtCenter.com.
Hey everyone, I'm Sri. I'm another renting artist here at McGuffey and I'll be helping to moderate this talk. Before we get started, I just want to mention a couple of Zoom etiquettes before we start. Please be mindful to keep yourself muted for the duration of this talk. The mute button is on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, and this session is being recorded and will be available for viewing after the talk today on McGuffey Art Center's website, as well as McGuffey's YouTube channel. That being said, if you don't want your face to be recorded, you can always turn off your video using the button in the bottom left-hand side of the screen. If you have any questions or comments that you want to share or interact with other folks here today, you can use the chat function to type in your questions, and it's located in the bottom center of the screen. Brielle and I will keep an eye on this chat box throughout this session, and we'll bring up any relevant questions for each of the individual artists. So please feel free to cater questions to individual artists who are here today. During their individual segments, we'll bring them up. Since we've got so many artists participating in this show and here with us today, we're going to take a little bit of time to talk with each individual artist and ask them some individual questions about their work.
Okay, so we are going to dive right in. We're going to get started today with our first artist, Sahara Clemons. Sahara is a multimedia artist, designer, and activist born in Washington, D.C. and based in Charlottesville, Virginia. Playing with both the traditional and unconventional, Sahara creates paintings on wood and fabric, wearable art, and fashion design. Her work confronts interpersonal and intersectional concepts and provides commentary on the historic, political, and social trauma of people of color and its effect on shaping identity. Thank you for joining us, Sahara. Very excited to have you here. Would you care to share a little bit about yourself and your work?
Sure. I mean, I guess like a lot of it was already said, but my name is Sahara Clemons. I'm a multimedia artist, and I am currently in my second year attending Rhode Island School of Design, and I'm very happy to be here and be a part of the curation committee. Unfortunately, I was not able to participate as much as I hoped to, but I am very blessed with the community that was made here. And so yes, currently I am majoring in apparel design, but I am still continuing my passion for doing painting and all things art.
Awesome. I'm sure it was hard to be as active as you wanted with a full college load. A lot.
Yes.
We have a few questions for you today. I just wanted to get started by asking if you could tell us a little bit about the piece that you submitted for the show, Finding Ceremony, and whether we're also curious about whether it's a larger part of a larger collection of works.
Absolutely. So when I began thinking about this show, by happenstance, I guess when we were trying to figure out what we wanted to be the collective theme of the February gallery, I was also in the midst of reading two works that were also discussing water as metaphor when talking about Blackness and the history of being Black. So the two works that I was reading was Black Shoals by Black theorist Tiffany Lafabo King, and as well as Finding Ceremony by poet Alexis Pauline Gum. And so both of these works were kind of the inspiration, as well as just trying to figure out, based on my own experience of water, recontextualizing that and looking at it through the lens of these two individuals. So I wanted to, both of these works, they really do play with exploring water, ancestry, and ceremony and how those things collide. King looks at how both water and land work together through shoaling, and how African and Indigenous people work together through history, that it's not just one or the other. When we're looking at Black metaphors, it could be both water and land. Whereas Gum really looks at taking specific objects from the sea, like sea creatures or shells, and putting that as like the metaphor for ancestors. And so with all of that, I had a bit of a difficulty on kind of figuring out what I specifically wanted to do with this piece, because there was so much information that I was getting from these two works. But ultimately it came down to my just personal feeling of being underwater and how that is where I like to go personally when I am swimming. I don't usually converse with people. I usually just go below. So I wanted my subject to be submerged in water, to really kind of highlight this sort of manifestation of the space that Gum was talking about, and create this sort of atmosphere that is ethereal in some forms, to really just highlight the density of the subject of water and how it is multifaceted in terms of its interpretation, both literally and as a metaphor.
Actually, just wanted to ask, does this piece have a partner piece?
It does not have a partner piece, but I'm definitely wanting to continue to explore.
Oh, sorry, guys, I'm sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Go ahead, Sri.
I definitely wanted to continue to explore the themes that are happening. I personally, I guess, with my work, like to play around with different spaces and environments and seeing how they merge together. So looking at this being both like a sky or the sea, and how both of them could be infiltrating the same space in the specific piece. So yes, I definitely want to continue looking at water as a subject, but currently this does not have a partner piece.
Okay. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry about that.
I think your video got lagged for a moment.
Okay, I had a glitch there. So you asked the continuity of the pieces. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a little bit parting from that last question, but Sahara, what questions do you hope your creative work inspires in the audience? You've done a wide range of work, and I don't know if you can sum that up, but.
Well, I guess I could talk about maybe this specific piece, and then also a broader term of question.
Absolutely, yeah, anything you want.
But I guess for this specific piece, I would want my audience to really maybe think about the subject and what her thoughts are being in this space, and also where is she going, because you see that at the bottom that she is sort of becoming a part of this environment herself. So what would maybe be this potential next step if it was a series of works? I guess questions that I always want people to think about are looking at, I don't know, like I really try to use color as a big kind of propeller in looking at the emotional qualities of the piece, and um, really just looking at the environment and the symbols that are present in the natural qualities and also the unnatural qualities of my pieces, because I really like to conjoin um, both and kind of play around with this sort of surrealist way of making and expressing. But yeah, I really often just want people, I know it is very cliche, but just what they feel themselves and reflecting on that, and not necessarily what I was thinking about in the process of making, because ultimately that's can be the most informative thing about the piece, and will probably be the thing that you take away with. And so I think, yes, if you see things that I had seen, you could quote unquote consider it a successful piece, but I want people to see more than what I have originally seen.
I love that. That makes a lot of sense. Our last question, and then we can take a question from the audience. So if you are thinking about questions already, guys, start putting them in the chat box, is about sort of your experience at RISD right now and how it's affecting your work. Basically, just now that you're at school, is there anything you're excited about exploring or that you're already exploring that you want to tell us about, or something that's kind of brewing that's coming next? Or
Yeah. So I guess, as I said earlier, I chose to be in apparel design for my major. And so that has been an interesting shift from my first year in college. But I definitely loved my first semester and what I was working with. And so the prompt was about rethinking the body. And so and in addition to that, we were required to use white cotton as a medium. And so I wanted to play around with the cotton as a material, as the source of what I would be discussing. And that is the hidden history of this kind of white canvas that is very complex in terms of what it means when we're discussing the history of cotton production in America. And then to kind of further that and make a little bit more of a personal thing, how I try to combat these systems is through dancing. So using those two elements, that was kind of the final product of last semester. Currently, I am working on a new project, which is entitled Sense of Place. And so still working on the kinks of that. But I always try to make these prompts relevant to what I'm doing, and I guess my personal work, because you're here at university for a reason. You are spending money to create something that you're proud of and something that will feel like you can use in the studio space, I can use in your portfolio. And so I do really deeply treat these as personal projects and not just assignments. But yeah, looking forward, I am definitely am working on more paintings on the side. And there are potentially things that might be happening with that the following year. So I'm excited.
Cool. This is an ad lib question, but do you have any more murals on the horizon, real quick? Or that you can secret. You don't have to divulge any information you're not supposed to divulge.
I would say maybe is my final answer.
I love it. Okay. We'll keep our eyes out. Awesome. So I do have a question here. Maybe I'll wait a minute and see if any more come in, and we'll pick one if you guys have. Oh, awesome. Zoe has shared the titles of the books that Sahara mentioned for everybody, if you guys would like them.
I actually want to throw a question in. Also another ad lib question. I don't even know if I'm supposed to as the moderator, but I wanted to ask, so I know that like I've just following your work for a while and kind of seeing how a lot of your works are really inspired by like, not necessarily pop culture, but a lot of like, they have a lot of historical context in poetry and music. And I'm wondering, just could you speak a little bit about what draws you to taking these other artistic mediums and then putting them into this visual space?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, I don't know. I think that there's something I feel is intriguing to me about the opposing forms of expression of like a text or a song or like a lyric versus something that is visual, but they are so connected, and it's sort of like I feel admired by these people that I gain inspiration from as people who are able to use words to create that image in my mind and what I want to do. And so I think that song and poetry is just like an art, they go hand in hand. And so I think that the things that I feel are hard to express for me personally in words, that they do that, and then there's things that beyond what they say that I might go into in when it comes to the final product. But yeah, like I'm definitely a fan of Audre Lorde and Nina Simone, like all of these people. Just when you listen to the poetry or the songs, like I don't know, it's just the visceral quality of it is something that I feel is a great jumping off point to start creating something with intention.
I love that. That's a perfect answer.
I'll just read the question that I put everybody, everyone, I have put her Instagram and website in the chat box in case you want it, just because I was sort of responding preemptively to Lindsay Diamond's question of, is there a place we can see your pieces that you are working on in school? Do you post them on social media? Is there a better place, Sahara, that people could find your work other than your Instagram or website?
There is not. Currently, I am still in the midst of photographing or documenting previous apparel work that is outside of what I have done this year. But the things that I did complete, which I was referring to in the first semester, that is on my Instagram, as well as the performance piece that goes with the apparel.
Okay, cool. And I do have one other question that's I want to hear the answer to, from Adrian Dent. If you could collaborate with any artist, who would you love to collaborate with?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, there's so many people, but I guess I'll have to go with the person that immediately came to mind, who I guess is Amy Sherald, who who's shown at Charlottesville, I think it was 2008. and her work is definitely put me in a place where I really value what she discusses when she's saying she wants to portray a character, and that this is an archetype, this is a person that you can see and confront, but it represents a larger sense of self that touches multiple people, and also looking at the value in simplicity when it comes to work. I value when you can definitely say a lot of things by just putting a few washes of color, and like bringing, as long as you feel when you're making, you have those little things in place, those little kind of secret gems hidden around. I think that it to me, I think that is so powerful in her work, and something that I aspire to do. So yeah.
Amazing. I would love to see that collab. Awesome. Thank you so much, Sahara. That was amazing. We really appreciate you being here and sharing your work and yourself with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right.
So our next artist for the evening is Clinton Helms. Clinton was born in Virginia in 1959. His interest in the arts started during childhood around the age of 9. In 1978, after high school, he enrolled in the School of Arts at VCU, and 1 year later, he enlisted in the United States Army. He graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Illustration from VCU in 1999. In 2001, he retired from the United States Army with over 20 years of service to become a full-time artist. He earned a Master's of Fine Arts in Art degree from Marywood University in 2007. He is an adjunct drawing instructor in the Arts Foundation program and Communications Art Department at VCU Arts. Thank you for joining us, Clinton. I would love for you to just share a little bit about yourself and your work.
Oh, thank you. Talking about Freedom Reign, the painting that I submitted, can you pull up the image? Share the image. Okay. Okay, to talk a little bit about this piece, I want to thank the committee for giving me the invitation to create this, but it started with a lot of thumbnails. At the time, I was thinking about my ancestry DNA and doing research on my family history, where I come from and how I got to where I am as a visual artist. So I decided to play around with a little of my faith and try to create a storm to not only to tell my story, but I want my viewers to look in this piece and see something of themselves, or where their story lies, or the people that influenced them. So I think the image, the way I went about it, to the imagery to enhance and pull the viewer in, I tried to use a technique of fading the images using monochromatic tones. And you have to view it from a distance, and it draws, I wanted to draw you in, because all of the phases, I don't want that viewer to see them all at once. You have to really look at the piece and walk away with your own interpretation.
Thank you for sharing that. I feel like this is one of the pieces that's in the show that a lot of people have come back to many, many times, because there's a lot of hidden imagery in there. And I think what you did with fading things into the background, into the skies, is really powerful and effective.
Thank you. I feel honored. I think I nailed it. If that's the result of what's happening, I feel very pleased. Thank you.
Yeah, and I was curious actually about, there's a little bit of mixed media in here. There's a tiny bit of collage, and you actually use some wire that you've added in. Do you often play with using mixed media or like adding things onto your paintings?
Actually, that was the first time I did that since probably my undergraduate years at VCU. It just happened by happenstance. Actually, I was putting away Christmas decorations, and there was a piece of wire laying on the floor, and it's like a light bulb went off and say, "Use this in this painting." Um, Actually, for the streak of lightning, to show that freedom, that separation is all God's doing.
I love that. Did you find in creating this work that it was hard to come up with something for this theme, or was it actually easier than you thought?
It was it wasn't really hard. Again, like I said, when I approach a painting, I start with a lot of rough thumbnail drawings of ideas that are going through my head, and trying to put those together visually from that rough is the hardest process. But to me, I had fun with this piece. So I feel like I may incorporate, some of this theme in some of my future works.
I was actually going to ask Clinton if you were planning on continuing to use this sort of fading technique, or if it's something that you've done before, because it's so powerful and beautiful. There's like a real storytelling element to it, where almost as you travel through the piece, it's like other elements of the story are sort of unfolding. And it's amazing how it starts so contemporary with the masked demonstrators and protesters, and then is going into these historic figures in this amazing way. It really marks the year, and in this last year that we've had so well with the choices you've made. Are you going to continue exploring that sort of fade atmospheric?
Yes, I would like to, and I have used it. I can't think of one particular piece that comes to mind, but I've used it before. But I'm what works, I will use.
Yeah. And it's hard to tell everybody, but this piece is actually quite large. I don't have the dimensions on hand, but it's almost 4 feet tall, isn't it, Clinton?
24 by 48.
Okay. Yeah, so very powerful, really
Thank you.
beautiful. It sort of, it stands sort of as a human. I feel like it reflects the body of a person looking at it really well.
Great.
Awesome. Anybody?
I actually had a question that I wanted to add in, which is, and this is something that we talked about during our little test run, but I was curious, like, you mentioned that there aren't necessarily specific themes or concepts that you explore in your work, but are there certain kinds of imagery that you're drawn to, and a certain kind of story or narrative to your work that you try to tell?
Well, if you went to my website, cneartstudio.com, you see that I dabble in a lot of different genres. I do aviation artwork, I do landscape, portraits, I did children's imagery. So what I'm drawn to, I guess the most is telling the story, being that illustrative person that can create an image that will draw the viewer in. If I can communicate with the viewer, that's based on whatever theme I'm using. The job is done for me, I think. And that's not totally being satisfied with everything I do as an artist.
Yeah, it's definitely, I feel like as an artist, you're not always satisfied by everything that you produce.
Yes.
But if anybody has any additional questions for Clinton, please feel free to share them in the chat box and we'll bring them up. So we've got one question from Ramona Martinez that says, how do you think your service influenced your art making, or has it?
My service influenced my art making tremendously because it gave me that discipline and that belief in myself that I could do this. I started drawing at a very early age. I come from a predominantly large family, and you have to fit in. So I took on to art and started drawing, and people started recognizing. So that kept me out of trouble coming through school. And I have a lot of people, not only the military to thank for it, but there are a number of people that I can think that guided me and led me in this direction. And the first one come to my mind is my mother, followed by an art teacher I had in high school. And then once I got to VCU, the second go around, there were professors and players, mentors that really, grounded me and guided me along the way. So I'm thankful and feel well blessed to be able to do this. But the military, the service helped because, again, that gave me the confidence and grounded me to strive for the stars.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Of course. Clinton, we do have a question. You did include the Lee statue in Richmond with the BLM lights on in this painting, didn't you? It's right above the.
Yes, I did.
Yes, it's hard to see in the photo, but.
But that I want that to draw you in too, and that was going on right when I was planning the painting, when I was going through the rough thumbnail phase.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Yes, it's so, if people can see it in person, it's really impressive to just wander through the piece because it has so much going on. I think that
I like the end if no other questions. I totally believe Black Lives Matter, and yes, Black artists matter too.
Thank you for saying that, Clinton.
You're welcome.
And thanks for being here today. It has been such a pleasure to meet you through this process, and I'm super excited to be able to work with you again.
Thank you.
yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Our next artist is Leslie Lillard. Leslie's a mixed media artist who works primarily with acrylic paint and paper manipulations. She has a background in psychology, mental health counseling, and graphic design. She resides in Madison County with her husband, 2 daughters, and 3 cats. Thank you for joining us, Leslie. Would you share a little bit about yourself and your work, just in general?
Thank you. In general, so with I'm from the country. I live in Madison County, actually, so I'm not in Charlottesville, but about an hour away or so. My background in art actually didn't start very much until after I received my bachelor's. So I received my bachelor's from UVA in 2004, and I received in psychology. And I thought that was, pretty much where I wanted to head towards. And I love psychology. I love the psychology of like the colors of emotion, a lot of color theory. And I really like what that involved. So I actually thought that I wanted to go into counseling and be a therapist. And I actually went to grad school at VCU for a short period of time because I thought that's actually what I wanted to do. But not long after I got into grad school there, it dawned on me that this isn't exactly the path that I thought that I should be taking. So I went to Piedmont, Virginia Community College and received my certificate in graphic design from there instead. And I loved every minute of it. So I knew that I was right on the right track with that. And from there, that's when I finally realized that the art track is what I'm really on, and that's where I should be. And I wanted to meld both my degrees of psychology and my graphic design degree from Piedmont. I wanted to put those together and create art with that in mind.
I love that. That makes sense when we look at your work. Yeah, I really enjoy just these pieces. They really suck you in with all of their color and atmosphere, and they're really exciting to look at. Okay, I had a question about, it's actually just a little bit an expansion on your love affair with color in your pieces. Will you tell us just a little bit more about what colors in particular you're drawn to? And I don't know, I mean, I think the audience would love to know maybe the colors that are associated with specific emotions that you're interested in communicating, or something I don't know a lot about. So
typically I am drawn toward black and white, actually. I'm not really, I'm trying to branch out and go more into color, but for some reason I'm drawn to a lot of black and white, I think because of the contrast. Mm-hmm. But color in general, I love like color. I love the emotions that it evoke. And I love the fact that you can communicate your emotions through color. And it just, for some reason, it's easier for me to express myself mm-hmm. through how I'm feeling through art and color. And I like to write, and I like to write stories as well. But I need to express myself in an outlet. It seems with art or writing, but something about art just I'm in flow. I'm in a like perpetual flow when I'm actually doing art, and time just gets away with me. It gets away from me. So.
That's how you know it's a good relationship.
Yes.
Kweisi just mentioned here that he loves the colors, forms, and textures. And I was going to say that the textures in your pieces are actually really juicy and beautiful. Like, it's hard to tell. You can tell a little bit with the light in the photos. But yeah, there is a really lovely like texture to your pieces that adds to the depth in a lovely way. I wanted to know about the second piece in the slide here, Water to Field. It's a little bit of a different feel, and I just would love to know a little bit more about the background of it.
Sure. So basically with this painting, I wanted to do a painting about our journey from across the ocean to the fields and the plantations. And along the way, we had, death and sickness and strife, and I wanted to show that with the red, of course, because our ancestors' blood was spilled not only on the land but in the water as well. I feel like in a way doing this painting, it kind of hurt in a way to know. Like, I felt like almost like it was almost getting to the gory, side of it. But then it dawned on me, well, our history does have a lot of, gory sides to it. So why not put that in the painting? Why not, show that that's what I feel when I'm actually doing this?
Mhm.
And the purple line that's actually going down is supposed to be for our voices. There's a lot of singing. In the middle of all this, there was a lot of singing, and the singing was spirituals, a lot of spirituals, and that's where the purple is invoked. Purple has to do with royalty, and so they're singing to God, and it's coming, out of the fields. It's coming out of the plantations. There is some happiness there. I wanted to show that it wasn't all like strife and all sadness. There was some, air to, like, for them to breathe. It was something that was happy, that was involved with us. So I wanted to show that, when it comes to feeling sadness, you can typically find some form of joy even in the middle of the sorrow.
So amazing to know the story behind this piece because it has so many dimensions. Thank you for sharing that with us. Wow. I was wondering, so initially I was going to ask you about the connection between psychology and art in your work, but you have talked about that a little bit. So I actually was curious to pivot this a tiny bit, and if you don't have an answer, that's totally fine. But I was curious if you've ever thought about like the intersection of art and therapy, and if that's interesting to you at all, like how people can work through things using art. I don't know. I mean, while you were talking about your psychology background and then your new sort of foray into art, or your redirecting into art, I wondered, you might be like the perfect person to help people through stuff using art. I have no idea, but.
Yeah, it's kind of funny you said that. Like I said, it has taken me so many years to come to the realization that I can actually forge the two together.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I started off with psychology, then I went to rehabilitation counseling, and then I was a mental health counselor, and then I did graphic design, and then it finally hit me that there is a such thing as art therapy. And I feel like art therapy is one of those things where it hasn't hit the ground yet. It's still very new. So it's really hard to find a program where you can, get into, especially around here. And I actually was starting to look into art therapy because I feel like that would be a good field for me to get into.
Well, if I hear of anything, I'm definitely coming to you first because you already have so many things working for you. Yeah, we did have another question about how your artwork was connected and influenced by your psychology background. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, but at the moment, that's the question I have in the chat box. People can add another question if they'd like, if anybody's got anything on their mind.
So I think I basically explained how the psychology and the art has intertwined. Even when I was doing mental health counseling, before I even knew really about art therapy or anything, I was incorporating that in a lot of the mental health counseling that I was doing for others. So I was doing it before I even knew about it, before I even knew it was a thing. So
ahead of the curve. Your intuition is strong, your creative intuition.
Well, I found that it helped a lot of the kids that I was counseling.
Mm-hmm.
It was easier for them to open up to me through their art. So
that's a really good point. I do have a question. You mentioned being drawn to black and white. Do you have any black and white works that you've created?
I do actually, and there was actually one that I was planning on doing for this exhibit, but it's of an odd size. And I wasn't able to get it framed in time, but yeah.
Can people see your work anywhere online?
I was working on a website, but I haven't gotten it up and running yet. I do have an Instagram account that I sometimes put my work on.
Okay, do you want to share that with people or?
Sure, it's Lillard 7.
Got it. I will put it in the chat box for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amazing.
All right, our next artist for the evening is Benita Mayo. Benita is a native of Virginia and holds a BA degree from UVA. She's a sister, auntie, daughter, friend, visual storyteller, yoga teacher, and fine art photographer. She's an introvert who is often mistaken for an extrovert. Benita is introspective, enjoys time for musing and reflection, and relationships underpin everything she does. She has a passion to inspire others and to honor their basic goodness that dwells within all of us. Thank you for joining us, Benita. Would you share a little bit about yourself? We'll give her a second. She's on mute.
Oh, sorry, I'm on mute. I'm just talking. Thank you, Sri, for the invitation, and thank you to the committee for choosing my work to be a part of this amazing show. It has been a fantastic experience so far.
It's been such a pleasure to have you.
Thank
Would
you.
you share a little bit about your background in photography?
Sure. Like many, my introduction to photography was through my family. My mom, my grandmother, my aunt were all historians, for my family. But it really wasn't until I was planning a trip to Italy that I became really, really interested in photography. I did not want to go to such a beautiful country with beautiful countryside, wonderful food and people, and bring back awful photos. So being type A personality, I took lots of workshops to learn how to take professional photographs, and it had an amazing time on my trip. But I not only brought back wonderful photos, I discovered a passion that I didn't even realize existed. And from that passion, all I could think about and do was photography. And then that trip evolved into many more workshops, many more trips, all centered around photography. Wonderful group of friends and peers that I travel with and do photography with. It just truly opened up a whole nother world for me. But it wasn't really up until this point, thinking about this exhibit specifically, I didn't consider myself an artist. By putting this body of work together, offered an opportunity for me to try something new and something different. It offered a space to imagine and to create something that was really uniquely mine. And prior to this, I was so attached to the rules of photography and rules that you must follow that I didn't really allow myself to think outside the box until actually working on this project.
That is so cool to hear. I had no idea. Because your work is just gorgeous. And actually, before we segue into your photos, which we're going to share in just a moment, I would love to hear some of the prose that goes with the photos, if you have that to share.
Sure, I do.
Okay.
I do.
All right. So Benita's first piece is called Resilient.
And the piece of poetry that goes along with it, standing at the ocean shore. These images represent my interpretation of the Middle Passage. This is a story of courage, determination, and the power of hope. The ancestors were well aware of the challenges that lie ahead, but being true survivors, opted to accept this reality rather than running away from it. And water epitomizes the journey and the people. And then there's a quote that I love in the Tao Te Ching that says, "Nothing is weaker than water, but when it attacks something hard or resistant, then nothing withstands it and nothing will alter its way." And I thought that spoke to our journey as to our ancestors' journey. So this is resilient. In spite of everything, it resists. At the very edge, it's still standing. Stepping stones, wade in the water from one shore to the next. Sea stacks, created by the movement of water within water that is driven by the wind, represents what is left behind. The beauty and strength of the sea stacks are created from adversity and perseverance.
I had no idea you were such a beautiful poet too, on top of this amazing photography. Thank you for sharing that.
Thanks, Sherry, for asking me too.
I would love to hear about the story or narrative behind this body of work and how it came together for this show.
So it was really an interesting process. I mentioned I didn't consider myself an artist until as I was working on this show. When I saw the invitation, the call for artists, I had a visceral response, and I knew it was something that I wanted to be a part of. And I knew I had to submit something, and I knew that it would challenge me a little bit. So in my mind, I knew where I wanted to go with the project, but I didn't quite know how I was going to get there. And it evolved, little by little. I was digging through some of my archival work, and I was amazed at how much water played a theme in the work that I was drawn to, the images that I was drawn to. And I just felt, I felt a calling. I wanted to speak to the horrible realities of the past, but I wanted to juxtapose it with the beauty and the strength and the serenity of the landscape and of the water, and how you can hold both at the same time. And I felt that there was a tension between what I was talking about and then what you were seeing in the images. And that's really how it came to be. I wish it was more creative or more interesting, but
it is definitely interesting. It is really, really interesting. I remember when we talked the other day that you said that this was actually a part of a larger collection, that you ended up only sharing 3 of them, but there's more.
Yeah, so to share the paragraph I wrote when I submitted the body of work to you guys. Much like the reshaping and movement of the rocks by water and the force of the waves, the ancestors' misery and distress was transformed into resiliency. This capacity will be tested time and time again through the generations who have weathered many storms of life while longing for the stillness and the nourishment of the tide pool. And so I was working on a project with another class that I was taking, and as I mentioned, I had a reflexive impulse to explore the complexities of the slave trade and how that related to my family. I wanted to explore my own family history. There's one side of my family that the ancestry has been traced literally all the way back to Guinea, and I actually live in the land that was purchased from that journey and that exploration. So I wanted to not only talk about the horrors, but the agency and the powerful impact that our ancestors had on this country. And so it is large, it's part of a larger project in the sense that I want to add my own family history into the project. There are some more images, there's some more archival photos, but I really want to kind of layer that together. Not quite sure how it's going to come together yet, but it's in my head right now to do that.
That's awesome.
And yeah,
Thank you. Thank you for sharing
thank
that.
you. Thank you.
We actually have a bunch of questions for you. And I'm going to start with asking a little bit about your writing specifically. Have you thought about juxtaposing your writing and visuals in the form of a book or something like that?
I have not. I have not. Writing has always been a way for me to express myself. Being an introvert, that's often mistaken for an extrovert. It's often really difficult for me to express the inner knowings, that vulnerability. But no, I've never thought of that. So who
You
knows?
do it so well.
Thank you.
Yeah, the often mistaken for extrovert is super accurate. We have another question that is, did the ideas for the pieces and the prose come to you, or did the ideas for the prose come to you as you were taking the photos, or did they follow after you saw the images?
They followed after. Each of these images was taken in a different location. And these are archival images that I have in my catalog. And I have so many water images in my catalog. I didn't realize how drawn I was to that topic. So I think that's also something for me to explore as well. That connection to the water. Maybe it's my Pisces nature or something, who knows, my Pisces moon. But I am drawn to the water, and especially how you can manipulate the images through long shutter speeds and long exposures, and really just bring out things that if you're just walking along the shore, you're not going to recognize or not even see.
Thank you for sharing that. We have another question from Derek Waller that says, do you always take black and white photos?
I love black and white photos, Derek. Not always, maybe majority of the time, I do black and white.
Is there a reason why you're drawn to the black and white?
I'm not sure. I think sometimes, with the black and white, there's no distraction. You're not distracted by colors, and you just really are drawn to whatever the form, the shape, the graphics within the image. And for me, it speaks a different language. And I have many in my catalog, color, landscape, fine art pieces that I've done, and some portraits, and some documentary work that I've done and that I will be doing in the future. But I think the black and white takes away distractions.
Kori and Derek both agree with you. That's exactly what they do too.
Yeah.
Veronica has a question for you to segue back to when you were talking about Italy. Where did you go in Italy, and have you revisited those photographs for possible new work?
I was in the Tuscany region in Florence and Rome, and I haven't revisited yet. I had quite a few trips planned for 2021. For 2020, Italy was on the list again, so maybe it'll happen soon.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, Benita. It's
Thank
been
you.
such a pleasure to have you.
Alrighty. Next, we've got Kweisi Morris. Kweisi comes to Charlottesville by way of Detroit with a 40-year layover in the Arizona desert. He spent his childhood creating mythical constructs crafted from scrap cardboard and a vivid imagination. He earned a degree as a graphic designer from Arizona State University and is an artist, a performer, and a grower of greens, beans, and other wonderful things. He works with a variety of mixed media, including found objects. Kweisi's current creative work is influenced by the intersection of African American agriculture and art. He's fascinated by the notion of invisible water, like the 94% of water found in collard greens. Ever present, often invisible, but always indispensable, water courses through much of his work. Thank you for joining us, Kweisi. Would you share a little bit about yourself and your work?
Sure. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this presentation and to the show. It's been a wonderful experience for me. I've always drawn, when I was a little kid, if you gave me a cardboard box, pair of scissors, and some white glue, I could build anything. And it was just a way to amuse myself in a pre-social media, pre-color television era that I grew up in. And went on to university. I majored in graphic design, but was within the College of Art. So my background is in art. I chose a sort of a corporate career. So I spent a lot of time in the corporate mines. And it's only been recently that I've sort of awakened from that world and have embraced my art more.
I'm so glad you have. Your pieces are amazing.
Thank you.
Yes, so yeah, this is actually the first question I have for you. I would love to hear you talk about the story behind this piece. It's such an incredible piece to look at in person if people are able to make it to the show. It's so textural, there's so many elements to it, but I'd love to know the story.
In 2019, I was fortunate enough to take a trip to Ghana, along with a number of other people from Charlottesville. And it was a life-changing experience for me. I'd never been out of the country before, and I had never been any place where there were so many Black people and in such a different culture. One of the things that really struck me was the number of artists. I mean, it seems like every other person was engaged in some creative undertaking, whether it was carving, painting. It just kind of blew me away. And it resulted in me adopting a new name, kept my old one, but I go by Kweisi when I'm wearing my creative hat. And I came back from that trip and I had 20 years of like pent up creativity that needed to be released. So this particular piece just sort of spilled out. Having been a graphic designer and having worked in finance in the corporate world, I'm used to doing things in a very linear, analytical, rigid way. But this particular piece just sort of created itself. It is a narrative in 3 acts. And so it tells the story of the journey of the founding farmers. And in this case, the founding farmers are enslaved Africans who were enslaved, many of them in part because they had agricultural skills. They knew how to grow rice. They knew how to produce food, along with a number of other skills. And so the 3 acts, if we start at the top, the sand that is at the top actually came from a beach right at the foot of Elmina Castle, which was one of the slave castles in Ghana. It was one of the last places enslaved or captured Africans saw on their homeland before being shipped overseas. And so too did those shells come from that same beach in Ghana. The middle section of this is representative of the Middle Passage. And again, there's the agricultural theme. I've got the rice there. One of the stories about the Middle Passage is that women would braid rice into their hair as a way to bring something from their homeland to this new place that they were going to that they didn't know about. But the rice is also symbolic of the many, many people who did not survive the Middle Passage, who either jumped overboard or were thrown overboard, and their lives ended there. And then the bottom section here, the sand there came from Point Comfort in Virginia, which in 1619 was one of the first recorded places of enslaved Africans landing in what would become the United States of America. And the red, of course, symbolizes the brutality of slavery and the life that they lived. And so I would say that this story does not have necessarily, I wouldn't call it a happy ending, but it does have a second episode. Oh, and I should mention too that the barbed wire around the piece is just symbolic of the sensitivity of this story, this narrative that even today people still have a very hard time talking about the connection with this story with where we are today in this country. I would say with regard to the bottom piece there, that blood that came from the bodies and the blood and bones that were ground up into the soil gave birth to a new people, African Americans, whose culture and music and style has circled the globe a number of times. And so while it's not necessarily a happy ending, it's evidence and testimony to the resilience of Black people.
Wow, what an incredible story. Thank you. Yeah, people need to see this in person if they can. It's just wonderful to see in person. I can't believe you brought the actual textures back from your trip. That's amazing, from Ghana. Thank you so much. So this is just a little bit, there are elements of this in this piece, and it made me wonder about just your relationship to using found objects in your work, and if that's something that you do frequently, or if like in this piece, it's always, I guess I'm curious about what makes an object worthy of being in art, and if it's something that like you find and then you're drawn to it and then use it, or if you always have an intention before using it, like you did in this piece.
You know, my experience has been sometimes an object will just capture you. It will call out to you. Many years ago, I stumbled across a rock. It was just this flat rock, and it was like many of the other rocks in the area, but there was something about that particular one. And I picked it up and I thought, you know, this could be useful. And years later, I used it as a platform to create a sculpture of a Black Panther. And it was the platform that the Panther was crouched on. So what can make a piece special is that it can call out to you, or in some cases, there's nothing special about it, but the place and the time and the experience, the context of that particular thing could be what makes it special. And I would say that's the case with this piece. I mean, you go to the beach and there are a lot of shells. I collected way too many. But what makes these shells special, these particular ones, is that they came from a beach that was a stone's throw away from Elmina Castle, where almost certainly my ancestors had walked on that same ground on their way overseas.
Incredible. Yeah, they capture a lot, the actual items. The last question I had for you here is just a little bit more playful, but as a person who loves plants and growing plants, I just wanted to ask you a little bit. This piece that we're showing right now, Like Water for Collards, is really stunning. It's much larger than the other piece, and just so bright and sucks you right in with all of its beautiful color. But I am curious about were you making art about edible plants before you were growing them, or were you inspired by your own garden? Like, what's the relationship between you and plants and the art you make that is about plants?
Well, you know, my mother was an Alabama farm girl. I grew up out in Phoenix, Arizona, and you know, she had a green thumb and she could grow amazing vegetables out there in the desert. And so I always had this connection with agriculture, with growing things, produce and veggies. I probably knew how to, I'm pretty sure I knew how to plant tomatoes before I knew how to ride a bike. But when it came to my art, I spent, like a lot of boys, you know, my age back then, you know, I drew cars and superheroes, but I became over time more interested in organic shapes, and there's this combination of representational imagery, but then there's also this abstraction that happens the closer you zoom into organics. And so this particular image is kind of where I was going with that. And as you mentioned earlier, the hidden water here, 94% water, for collards. So I haven't always drawn vegetables, but I do now.
I'm so glad you do. I love this piece so much. It's near my studio and it's my favorite thing to see. One of my favorite things to see when I walk down the hallway. That is it for my questions, but we are ready if people want to put some questions in the chat box or if Sri has a question to ask. Anybody got additional? You gave us so much amazing information.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. We do have all the artists should definitely read through the comments in the chat box because people are writing really lovely things in here too, just about all the art that isn't necessarily a question. Leslie says that she loves that you have actual earth from these places in your work and loves the shape that you created with your elements in the last piece. And then Kimberly Powell says, hearing each artist's interpretation really provides wonderful context for their work. Each piece in the associated story speaks ideas and really inspires deeper introspection. Yeah, these have been amazing storytelling pieces. Judy is wondering if, because these two works are so diverse, if you work in a fairly diverse range of media and subject matter usually.
Currently, I am working across a pretty broad range of styles. This piece and the earlier piece are part of Ghana series that I'm working on. I've done some mask work, again, made from found objects, which I really enjoy, just finding things and seeing what I can create with them. So yeah, currently it is pretty broad.
Is there a place that people can find your work online?
Sure thing. I just put it in the chat.
Amazing. You read my mind.
On it.
Oh, you did? Yeah.
Good.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Kweisi. We really appreciate having you here and hearing your stories about these pieces. That was really, really incredible.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We'll have to come to McGuffey when you're next close by and visit so we can meet you in person.
All right, our next artist for the evening is Kori Price. Kori Price is a photographer and writer based in Charlottesville, Virginia. Originally from Culpeper, Kori has been proud to call Central Virginia home for most of her life and is passionate about telling the stories of her community. Kori holds a BS degree in electrical engineering from Virginia Tech and seeks to maintain balance between her technical and creative interests with her work. Her work has been shown at New City Arts and the Bridge Progressive Arts Initiative. Thank you for joining us, Kori. Would you share a little bit about yourself and your creative work in general?
Sure. Just want to say first that it's so great to be here and to see so many faces of the artists that, the curation team and I first saw their work and didn't see their faces. So it's just nice to be amongst so many of you here. And I've been humbled to hear how this show has impacted you and has created new connections and new things to explore. So it's great to see that my love of connections and telling stories has sort of found a place in this effort to help curate this show. So just want to say thank you to everyone here. I'm really interested in places and spaces and landscape and how we see them and what our perspective could be and what it could change to be. And just kind of interested in exploring and playing with things that are not normal. So blurring a landscape intentionally is something that I'm looking at right now and trying to make something abstract out of something that's really commonly known. You look at a beautiful landscape of the Blue Ridge Mountains and you know what that is, they're mountains, but what are you missing? Are you missing the gradient in the blue, how the sherbet of the sunset contrasts with that, or how landscape, my favorite hour is blue hour. Golden hour is great, blue hour is a little better. And one of my pieces in the show sort of reflects that. But what are we missing in what we're assuming is typical? And also, how are we interacting with these spaces? How are we interacting with each other? Who came before us and who's to come? And all of this happens in this one space that can change over time, that can have different meaning over time, but its XYZ coordinates are the same. And what happened there changes. And I think that's just so fascinating and interesting and things that I like to explore.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I would love, like, speaking of the history of places, I would love for you to tell us some of the history behind one of your focal pieces that was actually going to be the main submission for this show. And would you tell us a little bit about the idea behind this photograph?
Yeah, so Kweisi actually touched on a little bit of the history. I was really surprised to hear that the sand in the bottom of his work came from Point Comfort, Virginia, which I didn't realize this is Hampton, Virginia. So it's not that far away from Charlottesville and is very accessible to get to. So he touched a little bit on the history there, and that these are the first enslaved Africans to come to what would become the United States, or one of the first. And what I found that was interesting, and where the 20 and odd Negroes comes from in the title of the piece, is John Rolfe, who, if you remember your Virginia history from grade school, was married to Pocahontas. So a very interesting figure that a lot of people know about. He actually wrote about the first, or one of the first ships that came to mainland English colonies in 1619 to the Virginia Company in London. And he wrote that there were 20 and odd Negroes that came on the White Lion vessel and were traded for victuals. So essentially saying that this was the first written account of a transaction of human life for food and supplies. And that learning the history there really made me start thinking about who were these people? Who, what were they feeling? What were they experiencing? Did they actually see the sandy shoreline, or was it somewhere else on this sort of strip of land that's a part of Hampton, Virginia? And so I actually went down there and I listened to the 1619 podcast from the New York Times, which is a spectacular podcast. If you have a moment to listen to it, it just talks about so much of the history there. And sat in this place, and it's just such a weird feeling to be there, because there are condominiums that are right on the shoreline, and they're probably valued pretty high. There's a boardwalk with people walking their dogs and enjoying the afternoon, but there's also this history that's happened there. And here's this XYZ coordinate, right? Or this XYZ in the 3D visual space is sort of what I'm sort of visualizing here, where so much has happened and so much is currently happening. And the juxtaposition there is interesting. So I thought to say, what if their shadow is here, but they're not there? They're not physically here anymore, but they've left their shadow, they've left their legacy. What would that look like? And that sort of inspired this piece.
That's beautiful. And I also because I haven't heard that whole story either. And now hearing that, I have so much more context for the next question that I was going to ask you, which is about your community portrait series, where you were going to be projecting this image onto participants. And I'm curious if you could share a little bit with us about how that community portrait series kind of came up through this process.
Yeah, so, if you can kind of visualize and take the shadows out of the image, it's just this sort of really nice background of a shoreline. And what I wanted to do is play around with how can I get folks more interactive or able to interact more with art, because I feel like it's so rare to be able to interact with art in a sort of really tangible way, or maybe even a tactile way. It's, you know, a lot of what I've shown before has been in glass on a wall. So I wanted to be able to do something where I pull in the community and allow them to be a part of both the legacy of these more than 20 enslaved Africans, as well as think about what's currently going on in your life and with your experiences, and how are you creating your legacy at the same time. And by using a projector, I'm able to both have you become a part of that landscape while casting the shadow of your legacy in the same area that I've casted the shadow of these more than 20 enslaved Africans.
And I think as an add-on, I had a little thing to add to that question, which is, why do you feel like this community project serves as a good vehicle for carrying the story behind this work?
I think it's because it's different. I don't think it's every day that you get a chance to become a part of a landscape without having to go somewhere, and where that's, you know, that's something where it's easy for you to, it's accessible, but it's also a way for you to imagine yourself there, to imagine yourself there 400 years ago, to imagine yourself 400 years into the future. It just allows for, I think, sort of an openness of interpretation that physically going to a place kind of restricts you from. It's almost like a constraint. It's like, oh, those are mountains, that's the beach. It's 2021, right? If you're allowed that little bit of room to imagine, then I think you can start making more connections that you may not have made before. So I think it would be I think projecting imagery onto people is something I want to explore more. And I think because of that ability to just think beyond what you see, I think is really what it is.
Thank you for sharing that. Actually, this is not a question that I had prepared for you in advance, but I was curious about the story behind this, the second work that you have in the show that we actually added at the last minute. And I know that you had decided the title for it at the very last minute too. And I'm curious if you could just tell us a little bit of the narrative of it.
Yeah, so I just happened to have taken this image several years ago. Sort of like in the same style that Benita said, where, you know, there's a lot of images that are in your portfolio or in your catalog that when you start going back and looking at them, you're like, oh, I hadn't realized that I had so much of this. And a lot of that has been sort of monotone or just playing with a few colors, or all black and white. And for this particular piece, I knew there was something that resonated with me when I made the photo. And this was a chance to really dig into that, because I think as photographers, you see something and you're like, that's interesting, or that draws me in. And I may not know it now, but I'm going to take this picture and I'll figure it out later. And I think this is one of those where I don't know if you can see it very well on the screen, but there's actually like lighter tones with on the tree lens, and it's picking up some of the blue. And when I just stood there, I was just enveloped in nature and in the forest, and I took the photo. And I think later on, why I picked this title was, if you think about the Underground Railroad and traveling at night, and how there's comfort but also discomfort at night. And the full moon is out, there are no city lights around, it's bright, it's going to provide that light for you, and how illuminating it can be. So I think I started thinking around, like, what would they have felt? What would that journey have looked like for them? You know, the dark gave them cover, but it can also just be this very, trying to find the right words, but it can just be this very treacherous sort of journey, I suppose. And the moon's there for them.
Thank you for sharing that. And if we have any additional questions from the audience for Kori, I have a question that I'm going to ask. So if you've got your questions, type them into the chat box while this one's happening. But I actually wanted to transition a little. And I wish, I don't know if you have this in front of you. Do you have the prose you wrote for the show's theme?
No, but I can find it real quick.
Do it. I would love to hear you recite it for us. And I guess the context to provide is that earlier at the start of this talk, Brielle had mentioned that the entire water exhibition has been based on a theme, and the prose for this theme was written by Kori Price. And it is truly beautiful. And in a lot of ways, it has inspired a lot of the work that has been submitted for this exhibition. And it also provided a lot of the context for how work was selected for this exhibition. I'm gonna find more words to put in while Kori's finding this.
I'm almost on the website. Here we go. Apologies if you can hear my computer. It's the fan is having a moment. All right, here we go. Our lives are a rainstorm of agony, a river swell of ecstasy. Ancestors following the drinking gourd to freedom, navigating with cricket runs and creeks, the landscape their map. Rivers as barriers separating them from their enslavers. Baptism and revival in slow creek streams behind one-room churches on the black side of town. Release and rebirth and water enveloping our bodies. Overcoming the fear of drowning after overcoming the stereotype that Black people can't swim. Pound of marching feet on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the Alabama River underneath. Homegoings where tears of sorrow turn into joyous celebrations of life. Sweating out permed and pressed hair, unable to resist that one song that's your jam, and staying out on the dance floor because every song is your jam. Apple cider vinegar, a sharp sting in your nose as it's poured onto greens, soul food, a comfort with roots stemming from our ancestors' meager provisions as slaves. Their traditions, their instinct, their spirit carried with them over an ocean continued in us. Thank you.
I don't know if you can hear my clapping, but that was beautiful, Kori. I kind of want to ask just a quick question about how you came up with this prose and that is now just so integral and embedded in what this show is. Would you share a little bit about it?
Sure. Yeah, real quick. You know, our team was kind of surprised ourselves with picking water as a theme. We kind of discussed our way, backed our way into it. And then the following question was, well, water's kind of broad. How do we provide this framework? So I think I'd been writing some of the emails and someone's like, Kori, you said you're a writer. Do you want to take a shot at it? So I did. And, you know, we kind of talked a little bit too about why we were drawn to water on the call. So I kind of took those ideas, took some of my own, and a statement, a paragraph, you know, something pretty typical wasn't doing it justice. And so I just sort of free wrote and edited and brought that back to the team. Eventually, I think there were some revisions in there and they were like, no, this is powerful. We should use this as the call for artists. So I was very pleased to be able to inspire so many works as well, or those new ideas because of those words and sort of that teamwork to make it happen.
Thank you for sharing that. You've got a load of wonderful comments coming through.
Oh, you guys are all so sweet. Thank you so much. I really appreciated this.
Thank you for sharing with us.
Yeah, and I'm just so happy to hear you recite your work. And I'm just like, have you recited your work before?
That would be a first.
I was gonna say, I don't think I've heard it in your voice.
that would be a first.
Well, congratulations.
Hopefully there's more.
Yeah, this is definitely not going to be your last.
Thank y'all.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kori.
Okay, guys, our next artist is Benford D. Stellmacher Jr. Benford is creative to the core, raised in Bloomfield, And known to many as Dwight, he found his creative calling where he started sketching still figures and graffiti on napkins and any blank piece of paper that he could find. With a catalyst of inspiration from his wife, coupled with a prophetic word from his pastors, Benford launched his original artwork e-commerce under BD Stellmacher Jr. LLC. His tagline mirrors his mission, which is creating conversations through canvas, where his heart's desire is to create an artwork where the spirit of the works created speaks directly to the hearts of mankind, convincing them to continue the conversation from whichever wall the artwork resides. Thanks for joining us, Benford.
Hi.
Would you share a little bit about yourself and your work?
Sure. So, as stated, basically grew up in Connecticut. I love drawing graffiti. Just always had a pencil in my hand. Literally, I wanted to continue drawing after high school, so I went to Hampton University and majored in architecture because I just wanted to keep drawing, and I didn't know anything about graphic design or anything like that. And once I graduated there, started kind of doing graphic design for my church. And so later pursued in 2010, pursued a I pursued a graphic design, an associate's in graphic design with an emphasis in advertising layout. And then later on, I went on to get my master's in UX design. So, but basically, it was literally my wife. She asked me to host a sip and paint 2 years ago in December of '98, which I agreed to reluctantly. But that ended up being the catalyst to my artistic endeavors. Like one of my friends told me, he was like, "You are always an artist, you just changed mediums." So, I still have my graphic design studio that I started in 2010. But literally have just flipped the page to new creative endeavors.
Amazing. The best people in our lives push us toward the things we're best at, right? So.
Most definitely. Oh, and let me just say this. I want to, number one, thank God and the McGuffey Art Center just for this opportunity, because this has truly been a catalyst to my confidence. I wish you guys could have been a fly on the wall when I got the email. I was just like, yes. And
Yay!
And just I've never shown my work, so just to be able to put it on display, it's just been a brand new experience for both me and my wife, just to see it actually hung, and just truly looking forward to what the future holds.
So amazing. I was bummed I wasn't able to meet you the day that you got to talk with Sri, but I know that when we were laying out the show, the curation team felt your pieces should be one of the first things people saw because of the story, which we'll get into in a minute, but also the colors they really bring people in, and they're large pieces, so they're very powerful just in their size as well. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about the narrative behind the 3 pieces that you submitted to the show.
Okay. So wanted to kind of share the quick story behind it. So there are 3 pieces. The very first piece is called the Power of a Flower. And I had literally just finished watching, and so funny enough, Kori's prose actually kind of inspired me, because when I saw it, I was like, okay, what am I going to do with water? And I'm a youth minister, and so the first thing that was on my mind was baptism, right? And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna paint a church, and then I'm gonna paint, a baptism scene, and I was just led in a totally different direction. And so I had just finished watching 12 Years a Slave, and literally just a storyline, just a quick summarization of the movie. You had a very wealthy Black man who was deceived into thinking that there was about to be a business venture, but ended up enslaved and basically became a slave. And for over 12 years, was stripped away from his family, the whole 9 yards. And so when I did this piece, it was, the fish kind of just represented Black power, but holding on to that piece of cotton and the literal power that flower had to cause his enslavement, and not only his enslavement, but when you just totally look at, you know, you as a human being, and the premise that somebody just had the idea that I want to enslave another human being that bleeds the same blood that I do for my own financial wealth and gain. So that was the whole premise behind the power of a flower. Now, if you go to the next piece, and so this was very interesting because when I looked at baptism, I found an article, and I had never heard this story before, but this was a representation and a tribute to the Igbo tribe of West Africa in Nigeria. And so there was a group of about 75 enslaved people, and they were basically on a boat. They revolted, and this was the part that just intrigued me. They revolted, and in their revolt, the boat crashed in the Dunbar's Creek in Georgia, and they drowned all the enslavers that were on the boat. So they literally were free. They went up on shore, but subsequently at the leading of the high priest, who's represented in the all blue in the piece, they committed a mass suicide. And so what you literally see, and what I wanted to show there, was basically just the earth tones and the sky tones, but then walking down off of that Dunbar's Creek, submerging themselves. And I wanted to read a piece of the article to you, and it said that apparently the Africans went ashore, and subsequently, under the direction of the high Igbo chief among them, walked in unison into the creek, singing in the Igbo language, "The water spirit brought us, the water spirit will take us home." And they thereby accepted the protection of their god, Chukwu, and death over the alternative of slavery. And so the next piece that you see is called River's Resurrection. And so River's Resurrection was, for me, it represented an abstract expression of the ascension of their spirits, because when you look at it, rather than them being enslaved, they were willing to commit suicide and kill themselves, even at the very thought of being held in bondage and in slavery. And so this was kind of a very euphoric experience for me, because when you look at those three pieces, I literally started thinking about myself as an artist and my evolution as an artist. And so what I found myself looking at was the power of a flower represented bondage, right? And sometimes we as artists, we find ourselves in bondage to perfection, to all those different types of things, and where we want to perfect it. But I literally now, if you go to the next piece, I've literally committed a spiritual or a creative suicide, right? Liberating myself from that place of bondage and allowing myself just to create concepts in whatever way, shape, form, or fashion that now gives me the ability to go to the next picture, which is to liberate and resurrect my creative spirit and be free in what I create, how I create it, without, you know, the bondage of what are they going to think, who's going to say this, you know, did I use the right color, was the curve perfect, was the line straight? You know, so that was the whole, basically the string that tied all three pieces together for me.
Well, congratulations. I'm so glad that you are doing this now, and we're really happy that your work is in the show. Thank you for sharing that amazing story with everybody. We've all learned so much during this whole artist talk. It's amazing. You mentioned color, and just the colors you choose, which I feel like all the questions that you were mentioning at the end there are things that everybody goes through too as an artist, and you're so not alone with that. Just like, yeah, are all these decisions I'm making the decisions I'm supposed to make? And I don't know if you ever arrive, but you just have to follow your gut. And the question I had about color was just, what role does color play in your work? The colors in your pieces are so vibrant, and they feel so intentional. And so what role does color play in your work, and how do you communicate with color in your work?
So I find myself, I love bright, vibrant colors. And I've always loved shadow and highlights. because I love the depth that it gives. A lot of times, like you just said, I literally will just go with that gut feeling. I've found myself more recently, I start building up from a darker color to a brighter color, and then being able to accentuate with the shadows and the highlights. Like in The Power of a Flower, I wanted that brown kind of earthy undertone. I wanted the kind of grungy look. I wanted that kind of torn feeling, you know, from being a slave, and just that background. With the with Freedom's Baptism, I wanted that water, and just like I said, just that full submersion. I wanted you to see kind of like the sky highlight on, you know, the other tribe members, you know, heads, and seeing the blood from the revolt. And I forgot to mention, I actually looked up and kind of immersed myself in the experience. So I looked up an audible recording of the revolt on the Amistad, from the movie Amistad. And so, you know, I'm just thinking about how bloody they were from the revolt, from the fighting and everything. And then to go onto the creek and the landing, and then come back into the water. And then you start to see the blood being washed off in the water. But then you see the high priest who's fully submerged in that whole experience.
That communicates it so well. So what is next?
Oh, wow.
What's next for you, Benford? What are you working on now, and what are you excited about doing next?
So I'm really excited. I'm about to start working on more multimedia pieces on wood panel. And so I have a couple of pieces on my website at www.bdstellmacher.com. And one in the large canvas section, there's a piece I created called Mahogany, Melanated and Educated. And I literally just starting, so I want to start creating what I call my signature series, which is a collaboration and integration of my architectural, graphic, and now fine art backgrounds, but more so in the three-dimensional fashion realm. But I really love working on large canvases. The place where I buy my canvases from, when they see me coming in, they're like, "You're about to wipe us out again, aren't you?" And I'm like, "You know it." So I'm really looking forward to that, and just kind of building up that series of work.
That sounds amazing. Bringing all of your strengths together, combining all your
Yeah,
background.
and it's been funny because I've only been painting 2 years, and so just literally I'm still evolving and experimenting and kind of learning, and just trying to find that, like I said earlier, that liberation, just to experiment without, you know, having to fit into a certain mold, but finding my mold and creating it, and allowing that to just, you know, develop into the body of work.
Amazing. Does anybody have any questions from the audience for Benford? We can see here in the chat box. People have just been making really nice comments. I don't know if you've seen them yet, Benford, but they're really in love with the pieces.
Oh, wow.
I put your website on there too, so people can check out your work.
Thank you.
Yeah, we've shared almost all the websites so far on here, I think, and Instagram handles and stuff. So if people need to refer back, they can.
Yeah, I literally, so I was supposed to show work. So what was ironically funny, back in almost this time last year, I had just gotten back from Dubai. So I went on a cruise in Dubai and got back and was supposed to have an art show that a friend of mine was letting me use a space to do. And we had sold over 100 tickets, had to refund every single ticket because COVID literally had just hit. I was so happy that me and my wife made it back to the States before we were locked up on a cruise boat in the middle of the ocean. But I will say this, excuse me, it was literally perfect because I didn't have that art show. The creativity, it just started. Like, I literally was buying canvases in my living room, and yes, I've only been painting for 2 years. So literally, I just started painting in December of 1998, and so self-taught. I've never had any training. I had 2 art classes back in high school. I'm 40. I'll be 47 in July, and so, like you said, I love working in acrylics and spray paints and, stuff like that. So yeah, just looking, and that's why I say just looking at different mediums. So I love working with painting on wood, and, with the spray paint, and wanted to do more with spray paint and, acrylic, mixed media. But I also am very inspired by photography. I love lines, I love geometry, I love symmetry. So, a lot of my graphic design background, but that's why I said I kind of merge my architectural graphic design and kind of building that relationship between the two, and then bringing it forth into kind of a multimedia facet.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing with us, Benford. Everybody loves your work. You got to make sure to read all the rest of the little chat box comments as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We're gonna switch up our order a tiny bit and do Marley Nichelle next, just because Marley's got to leave earlier. So Marley, hope you're ready. Marley's a native of the Low Country of South Carolina and is currently based in Charlottesville, Virginia. He's a self-taught photographer whose work has been featured in the Associated Press, New York Times, and Shutterstock. He uses his lens to adventure into his creativity and capture every moment of resilience and beauty. While hoping to change narratives and amplify marginalized voices, he's also hoping to change his own perspectives and the way he sees life through pictures and photography. If he can show the world a different perspective, he wants it to be as authentic and as unapologetically Black as he can. Thank you for joining us, Marley. Would you share a little bit about yourself and your work?
Yes, so hi y'all, I'm Marley. I can't see myself, but could y'all see me?
Yep.
Okay. My name is Marley Nichelle, and so a little about my work. I do street photography, landscape photography, studio photography. What else photography do I do? I mean, I'm so versatile. Like, I do so many different types of photography. So I just try to be creative with it most times, more than anything, because I'm the type of person where I like to challenge my own mind. So when it comes to my work and when it comes to what I do in my photography, I heard like a lot of people saying that they love black and white. And one of the things that stood out when I can't remember exactly who said it, but she said that it doesn't give distractions. And I thought that was like a dope perspective, because when it comes to me, I do colors, and I love colors to keep distractions, but I do it to keep people's mind open, to get a sense of feel through color. That's why most of my pictures, the color is colorful, just so it can like challenge people to feel through colors, to get their own different creative and authentic perspectives of my work. So when I do this work, I mean, I like black and white too, but when I do the colors, like, I feel like in my work, it brings out more of people's creative side, because that's what it does mostly for me. So in the art and the work that I do in amplifying like marginalized people, those people who don't get platforms, I basically try to, do my arts in the form of spirituality and amplifying Blackness in the same light, but in a more liberated way.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to talk a little bit more about your home, and we've talked before, and I know that you are really attached to your home, and you mentioned in your statement being from the Low Country of South Carolina. So how has that shaped your work, and how does it inspire you?
So in the part of the Low Country where I live in South Carolina, well, most of the Low Country is on the water, and I've always been driven to the water ever since I was a kid. I sometimes I feel like it's because of my zodiac. I'm a water sign. I'm a Scorpio. So the water to me has always been like one of the best things to have living in the Low Country. So when I went to Africa back in December 2019 with the Charlottesville Winneba Foundation, we stayed on the water. So I had found that to be like one of the best things that could like happen, to leave out the country and go to another country that still felt like the Low Country. And it was because of the water. I've always been driven to the water. So in my work, most of my pictures are like of where I live now and not of the water, solely because I'm no longer in the Low Country. I'm in Charlottesville. But with home, we are people of a culture called Gullah people, and Gullah people, we worship the waters. Basically in that culture where I come from in the Low Country, we worship things down there. Like nature is a way of our worship, water is a way of our worship. That's where we go to calm ourselves. That's where a lot of our ancestors worshiped as well, on the waters, because that's what they worshiped. So over time, you know, you lose a lot of that. And I lost that coming to Charlottesville. I lost that culture because Charlottesville was a culture shock for me. So I no longer had constant places of water. I had to then find something else that I could worship. And I never lived in an area that had mountains. And the mountains in Charlottesville is what really drew me here. So it felt weird living in a different environment because it was very culture shocking. But what I love most about the mountains is very secluded. And that's what I'm used to in the Low Country. I'm used to being in predominantly secluded Black areas where Gullah people are. We are surrounded by the waters. Even though like in the mountains, I'm not around water, I am around nature. So like, that's my way of worshiping here. And that's why like with, you know, the Low Country, I hold it so dear to me because I've been going for almost 6 years now. And I really do miss home at this point. So when I get into the depths of my work, I always try to take most of my pictures so people back home could see like the universe that I exist in now versus where I come from.
Love it. And you mentioned this, you'll be going home a little bit soon, right? Hopefully to visit.
Yeah. Well, I'll be going home in May, near the end of May, to document. I'm doing a project called the Geechee Marley Experience, where I'll be going home to document my culture, the Gullah culture, to educate people on the culture. Because when I first moved here, like people used to tease my accent, and I didn't even really realize I had an accent. So it was awkward, you know, living in a different environment, because now I talk differently. And Gullah is more than the language, but I realized that within the way that I spoke, it wasn't really considered, you know, a proper way of speaking. So people would just automatically assume that I was Jamaican or from some type of island. And at first it was weird at first, because I don't like being an outcaster. Like I don't like to be different, but then again, it's dope being different, because I realized that Gullah culture is not here, even though there are probably people here who are, you know, descendants of Gullah people, and they just don't know. So not having that culture here, I was like, I needed to create something to where I could bring Charlottesville and my home together. And I created the Geechee Marley Experience. So I'll be going home in May to document my culture, to bring back to exhibit in the show, hopefully in 2022 for Black History Month. And I'll also incorporate the photos from my trip to Ghana with the city, to show the similarities in the culture and how exactly the same they are, from the waters to the culture.
That sounds amazing. I can't wait to to follow up on that and see that next year. You'll have to like get all of your, you'll just have to take so many photos when you're back home and bring them all back with you.
Oh.
So many photos of water. So the next slide actually has one of your other submissions to the show, The Jungle. And I just really wanted to know a little bit more about it. We've talked a little bit about it, but I'm so drawn to its calm elegance. It's just striking. So
I actually took this picture. Well, all the photos that I put in the exhibit are from Africa. And when I took this picture, it was the day we had it was a very long day. Like we had just went to one of the second slave castles, and the energy at both slave castles was for me kind of draining because the energy in those spaces were very heavy. And after the next day, after we left the Cape Coast slave castle, we had went on this canopy walk that was like up in the trees, and it was kind of like a hike to get there. So it felt like we had to go through a jungle. Like literally, it felt like we had to go through a jungle to get there. So I'm thinking in my mind, like, okay, we just left the slave castle. Now I'm attempting to walk up on a canopy walk in the middle of the trees, like this joint could fall, but I'm going to do it. And like the anxiety, after I actually had to take an anxiety pill, honestly, to even be able to do it, because I really wanted to get those pictures up there. And when I got to the top, I was like, okay, I got to do this. So at first it was scary, but then when I got used to it, I was like, okay. And it literally felt like I was walking in the trees through the jungle. After we left there, we went to this place a couple of miles from the canopy walk to eat. And it was this, even with the picture of the Careless picture, it was a space where it was so much art, flowers. And when I looked into the water, I saw this and it looked so calm, for real it did. And then when I took the picture, I was like, man, it just felt peaceful to me. So I was like, yeah, this is a dope picture. I took this picture after I got out of the jungle.
I was about to say, your anxiety is not manifested in this photo. You managed to leave it out of this photo. Yes. So I guess I just want to know a little bit more about the choices you made in the photos that you submitted. And now you've told us where they were from, which is I was going to ask, and the specific places other than this piece. So for the other two, do those two places have a special significance for you, since you've told us about the third one?
The first one, the Ancestral Waters, has a whole lot of significance to me because there is a lot of liberation in this picture. This picture is actually at the Cape Coast slave castle. Matter of fact, I took this the same day I took the other two pictures. So it's literally like a timeline.
That was a good day.
Yeah, so you got me literally standing at the foot of the castle where there's nothing but water. And like after you hear all the stories about the slave, the history of the slave routes and how slaves were treated, you went to the slave river where they bathed slaves and then send them to these castles. Like after you've done all of that, this is what you get to. At one of the castles, the first castle, the Elmina Castle, there was a door called the Door of No Return. And that was the door where once you basically for slaves, once you get to that door, like you're leaving and you're never coming back. And it was so small, like the room was so small. And like you have to imagine being in that room with, it could be up to 30 slaves waiting to, be shipped out to North America. And as you're looking through this doorway, like literally the last thing you see, and I felt like the last thing most of them saw of ancestral home was that view. And it was, back then it could have just been waters, but it was like literally kids playing, on the beach, like running around playing soccer. That's what you see. And then you think about it like, what did my ancestors really see? So when I got to this water, this castle, and I saw the waters from this perspective, I remember a lot of stories where I read about there were slaves that had rather died than to be in bondage. And for me, as being a Black artist, that's the most liberating thing to like ever really even know, that somebody thought that they would rather die than be in bondage for so, because they don't know where they're going at. And I know a lot of people may look at it in a different perspective because they think of it as suicide, but I think of it on the mental perspective, like, do I really want to go somewhere and be stripped of who I am just to appease and help build a nation for people who do not look like me? Heck no, like I wouldn't want to do that. So when I saw the waters, I thought to myself, how many slaves jumped from ships in these, and because this is literally right on the other side of the castle, like how many slaves jumped from ships when they went into these waters? And how many people recognize the souls of Black people that exist in those waters? And I do believe the myths about the hurricanes, I believe it's because of our ancestors, so that those things do happen in a spiritual, universal way.
Amazing. And this last little piece, which you mentioned being near the spot where you had lunch, but care less. Do you want to talk about that at all, or?
Yeah, I mean, when I saw this little kid, I thought he was real at first. For real. He looked so real. And then I was like, yo, this is a dope, like, whoever created this did an amazing job creating it, because he literally looks like he was just, even with the kids out in Africa, like they are so carefree. Like they run around no shoes on, like they run around with no clothes on and nobody bothers them. It's different from the US. Like we would look like, why are those kids playing with no clothes on? But for them, that's them. They care less. Like they could care less about what they have on. They could care less about how they look. They are just out having a good time. And when I saw this picture, I was like, yeah, I have to get this picture. I feel like this is a dope perspective of what Africa really is when it comes to the children.
Amazing. Thank you, Marley. All such good stories. Does anybody have any questions for Marley in the chat box? I don't see any at the moment, but I love your colors a lot, and I love the way that your camera captures. There's like a softness and a sharpness to your images. It's really, really amazing, the balance. These are they all shot digital? There's almost like a film quality to them.
No, actually they aren't. I actually shot this with a standard kit lens, honestly.
Cool.
For real. That's what I shot with mostly in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
But comparing this to what I take now, it's like it's for real. It's like looking at my old work, like, whoa.
It's a little bit weird. Ramona thinks you have the best titles.
Thank you.
They are really good. Well, thank you so much, Marley, for sharing and joining the Artist Talk today.
Thank y'all for having me.
Of course. Yeah, Sri.
All right. Our next artist is going to be Derrick J. Waller. Derrick is a proud graduate of the University of Virginia and has spent his whole life in Virginia, currently residing in Charlottesville. Derrick's expressive outlet is photography, where he finds great joy in documenting candid moments of everyday life. Derrick's appreciation of photography started at an early age, but mainly as a looker, but not a taker. It was the unexpected loss of his mother that pushed him to give it a shot. This interest quickly became a passion, and now he feels like he is missing out on moments if he doesn't document them. Although his main artistic medium is photography, he also enjoys painting. When you don't see a camera or paintbrush in his hand, you will find him spending time with his beautiful wife, Sarah, and their 5-month-old baby girl, Josephine. Thanks for joining us, Derrick.
Absolutely.
Would you share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I think this sort of bio summarizes a lot of it, but yeah, always been drawn to art since a young age, always loved photography, mainly, like I said in the sort of the bio, as a looker and not a taker. And, but just, I was the kid that would go to my aunt's house or even my house and just look through family photo albums all the time, asking, who is that? And, what's their relationship to the family? And, um, and even looking like from a photography standpoint, like where was this, and thinking how was this taken, and so I was always into sort of photography and looking through magazines and seeing photos that I like, but never had this sort of push or drive to sort of pick up the camera. And then as I mentioned, or Sri mentioned, my mother passed away sort of unexpectedly. Well, she was battling breast cancer, but sort of just a complication with her treatment, lost her unexpectedly. And it was literally the click that said, you know what, life is too short. Can't wait on things. You got to sort of make things happen. So it was that moment that just pushed me to pick up the camera. And I don't know, spent maybe $700-800 on our first, nice camera, and which was a lot of money. And I said, well, let me see if I'm really going to like it and sort of stick with it. And I've never put it down. It's been like 10 years now. So.
That makes me so happy. I'm really like happy to hear your origin story, because we have been like interacting so much in these past couple months, and it's really nice to hear you talk about yourself. Actually, before we even start talking about your photography, I kind of wanted to talk about something a little unconventional, which is your painting work, which you shared for the first time. And I would love to ask you about some of the stories behind the paintings that you shared, and specifically this one, which is a painting and mixed media piece with pins, and it's titled "Death Was Better Than Bondage."
What's interesting about this and today's artist talk is how many people have talked about death was better than bondage, and that wasn't planned, at least even on our preparatory sort of, meetings and chats. Not everybody mentioned that, but I think I found it. I mean, even Marley just talked about it. Benford just talked about it. I think Kweisi talked about it. Like, we've all sort of kind of hinted at these stories. And so when I worked on this piece, so I've been painting kind of on and off, just playing around. Again, like Benford said, not confident in my work, but just kind of playing around with paintings, probably 2012, 2013, so a while. And when I was thinking about art for the show, so as being part of the curation team, to be honest, I was really focused on all the activities and action that was around developing a good show, and working with our team of curators to really bring a good show, as part of this project. I didn't really know what I wanted to submit, how I wanted to submit it, what I wanted to do. And honestly, if some of the curation team can remember, we were getting kind of to the last few weeks, and I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. But there was this thought that one of the curation team members continuously referenced the movie Black Panther. Just randomly, she would just joke about Wakanda and just randomly, just sort of in our conversation. And I don't know if I was watching it later or one day or something. I saw a clip, and if you've seen the movie Black Panther, you might remember that there's a clip from Killmonger, who is the character played by Michael B. Jordan. And near the end, he says, and I jotted it down so I didn't mess it up, but he says, "Nah, just bury me in the ocean with my ancestors that jumped from the ship, because they knew that death was better than bondage." And Marley just again referenced that, but so I already knew that I guess that was the spark for me to say, I could do something with that right there. So I knew that I wanted to use blue in an art in a piece, and I wanted to sort of challenge myself and not just show photography. So I said, I'm going to do a painting. I knew I wanted to sort of use it, paint a water scene or a watercolor. So I already kind of had that in mind, but I was like, how am I going to represent, what I hear in those words? And I decided that, initially I was going to just paint black dots across the canvas, but I said, no, I want something else to represent, the unknown number of enslaved men and women that made the decision on that trip to not go through with it, and to sort of liberate themselves by jumping in the water and drowning. So I decided to because the water sort of represented sort of a map per se, not necessarily a map, but just the ocean. I said, why not use push pins? If you can buy a map, and every place you've been, you can kind of add a push pin. So I sort of use black push pins to represent the millions, or really the unknown number, but they say it's up to millions of people, or our ancestors that sacrificed their life, because they knew that they didn't want to be bondage.
It's so hard to tell from this photo, but I have the luxury of being able to see this work every day right outside my studio. And it is really, really cool that you decided to use the pins, because not only do they jut out of the piece a little bit, they also cast a shadow. And the lighting on this piece is beautiful. And I think it adds so much more dimension to your work. And I'm just, it floors me that this is like your first time sharing something like this.
It's interesting too, Shri, that you say that, because I didn't know that, or wasn't thinking about that. I knew I wanted dimension, but I didn't see the shadow. I didn't know anything about that. But as I was actually adding the push pins in, I started seeing, depending on the time of day where I was working on this, I started seeing the shadows, and I was like, that's just adding more to it. And it's a pretty big piece too. I mean, it's 48 inches by 48 inches. And I think there's probably about 3,500 to 4,000 push pins in there. So it took a long time to do. And it was very emotional, to be honest with you, because as I'm deciding, where to put the push pins, I mean, I'm thinking about these stories that I've been researching and reading about. And just like Marley said, just, our ancestors, how many souls were, are in those waters. So.
And Leslie actually asked a question on that, which is, do the pins track an actual route?
They do not. They do not. It was, and I thought about that actually. I thought about sort of, doing something more realistic, but I really just wanted it to be abstract. And really, because the ocean's so vast, so I wanted to kind of just sort of represent a large body of water. So.
Yeah, and I think that carries really well, because there's the quality of like water, but it's also some like floating on the surface. These shadows that are cast by like seeing the work it lit, I guess. It adds a lot of dimension, and I feel like the abstractness, like when you come up real close, it's kind of like what is it called? It's like there's like a visual, I don't know what I can't find the word. I'm gonna
optical illusion?
Yes, it's like an illusion. There's this, like stepping back, you see that there are like congregations of pins, but when you're close up, there's this illusion, and like it's hard to realize how many pins are actually in there.
Thank you very much.
And someone made the comment saying that they see sky in this, and to them it represented the thousands of souls drifting upward.
Wow, that's powerful. I think that's the beauty of art, right? You see, everybody has a different feeling and emotion from it. That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story behind this piece. Absolutely. And I know a lot of people who've gotten to come in person have read the show statement that goes with it. And I was curious, you actually have 2 more paintings in this show. And am I like next question for you was it intimidating to share a new style of work that you've never shared before or aren't necessarily known for?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I battle with painting. I think a lot of people have sort of hinted on this. It's a lack of confidence. I think the natural thing to do, not just for artists, but just in general for people, is to compare yourself with other people. So, being a student of art and just absolutely just loving art, you always are comparing your work to other people where you say, man, I like the piece, but it doesn't compare to Benford, or it doesn't compare to, this person or that person. And so, yeah, it was very difficult to share, a medium that I really never, I didn't feel super confident in, but it was also, it was very liberating, to be honest with you. I think this whole show in general was very liberating because it's one of the first shows I've ever been a part of from a curation standpoint. It's the first time I've shown, painting, but 2021, that was sort of one of the themes in my life was get out your comfort zone. So just kind of tied right into that.
I had myself muted. I really love that. And I'm so glad that we got to see so many different dimensions of what you do through this process.
Thank you very much.
And would you like to share a little bit about the photographs that you had up?
Sure. I mean, honestly, I don't even know. Again, I was so focused on the curation standpoint. I was still at the place where I didn't know what I wanted to share. And I had these photographs that I've taken that are kind of connected to another project that I'm working on. And these are just, my house is like right outside of a local park here. And I walk the park all the time. And, and many times I go during times where it's raining or the conditions aren't, it's just not sunny out or it's a little dark. And I just try to create different things. And these were just sort of two pieces that were taken at a park and kind of either in drizzling rain or I don't even exactly remember when they're taken, but I just liked them, and I was like, you know what, I'll share them because it's something. I love black and white photography, but it was a little something different, and I found power in reflections, and so both of these had their own different types of reflections that you see, because it's reflections are literal, but also there's so much you can personally take in looking at yourself and sort of. I mentioned 2021 being I had a self-reflection and I said, you know what, I'm gonna push through and push out of my comfort zone. So there are literal reflections in the photographs, but it also represents some things that I wanted to do personally in my life as well.
Thank you for sharing that. Do we have any additional questions for Derrick from the audience? Feel free to drop them into the chat box. Well, I guess I wanted to ask another thing in line with actually Kristen's comment, which is, do you see yourself sharing more of your painting work, or are you already doing so in a way that we don't know about?
I am. I've been very motivated from showing work at this show, and I have been painting a lot actually. And actually, I mentioned Kristen and I had a brief chat about this bit, but I'm really finding myself drawn to gold and silver, so like metallics. So I've been playing a lot with those colors in my painting work. So I don't know exactly what I'm going to do and like how I want to show it. But I have definitely been painting a lot. So I'm excited to see where that goes.
That's awesome. In that same vein, someone asked, going forward, what medium do you feel like gets you most excited?
I don't know. I mean, I still love photography. I mean, you know, really enjoying painting, but I love photography. I love, you know, I love candid moments. I love, you know, I love documenting real life. I think, you know, with social media, sometimes, you know, we all tend to share the best of ourselves. We don't tend to be on social media showing when we have a bad day, or, you know, we tripped up the steps, or, you know, we don't show those things. And that's why I'm really drawn to candid moments and capturing the real, you know, about life. And so I have quite a few projects right now that are photography related, and like day in the life type projects, and just documenting real life. So I think equally excited about both, but I still love my my camera, I had to say.
That's awesome. And I always think of it as like, I don't really like one more than the other. You like them differently.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Derrick.
Thank you, Derrick. I feel like it's safe to say everybody here is excited for both of your directions.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, guys.
All right, we're gonna move to our last artist for the evening. And our last artist is Veronica Jackson. Veronica's background encompasses the critical examination of visual culture. As an architect and designer, she creatively solved problems related to the structural systems within virtual and built environments. As an artist, she records, interprets, and makes aware the complexities in which humans exist and affect their social surroundings. Her visual art making practice is a combination of the past professional disciplines, present lived experiences, and the cache of contemporary and historic research accumulated. This constellation of information forms the foundation of her practice, which investigates how Black women see, don't see, value, or devalue themselves in visual culture, and how these attitudes affect their sense of agency in constructing their own imagery or endeavors to mark space. Thank you for being here, Veronica, and for sticking it through this talk.
Yeah.
Would you share a little bit about yourself? I know I've shared a large bio, but I would love to hear it from your own words.
Sure. So thank you to everyone who has also stuck around to hear all of my great colleagues in the show. I'm so grateful to be curated into the show, and it's so very interesting to listen and hear everyone else's like pieces and like see the connection through all of our works. And I guess that means that you curated, you had great curators, right? You curated it well. So a bit about me, I am an architect by training, an exhibit designer by profession, and now a visual artist by profession and love. My visual art making practice is the intersection of my architecture training. I graduated from UVA architecture a long time ago, and also my 30+ years in museum exhibit design. So I am a storyteller. And I finally, like a lot of my colleagues, finally gave myself the permission to be an artist. Like I didn't realize I was an artist for all those years. So I just recently started making art 3 years ago. And so my medium is found objects, but at the core, my work is autobiographical, and it reflects my way of visualizing the plights against my Black body as a woman in America.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
And this up right now on the slide is your main piece or pieces featured in this show. And these are pretty large broadsides. And I would love to hear a little bit about what this series of broadsides is about, and
Sure.
kind of some of the context behind how you created it.
Yeah. So I assume that this, and unfortunately, I haven't seen the show because I'm in a residency. Well, not unfortunate that I'm in a residency. It's good that I'm in a residency, but it's unfortunate that I haven't been able to see the show. So I assume that this is probably the only text-based piece in the exhibit. And so I'm grateful that you accepted my work, because it's very different from the others. And the element is, a lot of my work is text-based, and I do that because that's the exhibit designer in me, that's the educator in me. So this piece came about because of a crazy executive order that our former president, Trump, signed on September 22nd, 2020. And I'll just read a little bit of the text panel to give you context. So on September 22nd, 2020, the former president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, signed an executive order on combating race and sex stereotyping. And what that order did, it banned all diversity training, including the study of critical race theory and the examination of gender biases existing in the federal government. So just that executive order, just seeing that that is something that a president signed who has so many issues with race in this country, signed this order that banned education about the element that is the bane of our existence in America, which is race, because slavery has never been really resolved. And in this show, we see how many of my colleagues talked about like the Middle Passage and the legacy of it, the enslaved bodies coming across involuntarily across the Middle Passage. So this whole element of like not acknowledging that race is an issue. And when race is that foundational element as a problem, then you get sexism and classism, all these things build upon it. So that you are banning this type of training in the federal government facilities is just insane. So it's the exhibit designer in me that said, okay, I need to put this out there as like that text panel, the thing on the left, tells you what the piece is about. And as a result, I was like, okay, how can I talk about this and allow people agency to contribute to our response to this work? So the River of Hope hotline stems from, not only did they ban this training in federal government, they also set up a hotline for people to call in to report people who were still having this training. So not only are you going to ban it, then you're going to blow the whistle on people who know the importance of these things but still want to have it. So they set up a government hotline. So these are our tax dollars at work, right? And so my response to that is I created the River of Hope hotline. And it's based on Charlottesville. I've done some work in Charlottesville along the Rivanna River, right? And so the Rivanna is a major river that runs through Charlottesville. And so I played off that whole idea, and then water was the kind of subject matter for this piece. So it's like that idea of that river running through water cleanses. And so this River of Hope hotline was an opportunity for people to text messages about their responses to this insane executive order. And I had a number for people to text and to text the messages to the River of Hope hotline. Unfortunately, I didn't receive any texts. So, the show's not over yet. Hopefully people can come to McGuffey, get the text, or maybe we can drop the text into the chat. Because what I was gonna do is once people texted me the information, I was gonna compile it as like an Instagram story and put people's comments bi-weekly on an Instagram story and just reveal to the public, these are the sentiments. These are the responses that I received as a result of this artwork. So I love when, and this is the exhibit designer in me once again, it's like this artwork is interactive in the sense that it is not just for you to look at, it's for you to interact with, and it goes beyond the McGuffey as well, right? We are in this mode of the internet connectivity, especially now with COVID. So much more of life is online. So why not use that as an advantage and welcome that as an invitation for people to join with me and just talking about our discomfort, talk about these issues that are so crazy in some ways, but we as American citizens, part of our civic duty is responding back, giving comment. We vote, but we also need to comment about things that we don't agree with. That was a really long answer to your question, but.
No, it's a great answer. And I also the one thing I'm sure right after people get off this talk, they're writing down that phone number and you're going to get a lot of text messages.
Okay.
We will
Yeah.
encourage it.
Exactly.
One of the things, and this is like slightly to segue from the context of this piece, but more the visual aesthetics of it.
Sure.
Was there active visual decisions that you made in terms of color, in terms of what was bolded, what you feel like was necessary for people to see?
Yes, great question. So we can talk about the colors, right? And so broadsides, part of broadsides, right? They're large. They are broadcasting a message, but they also have to be aesthetically pleasing to draw you in. So the colors are basically the Pan-African, Afro-American colors. So the Black national anthem, Black flag colors, red, black, and green. And this is Pan-Africanism, Marcus Garvey, the 20th century element of like this kind of global African and African-American colorization, right? These are the colors that represent Pan-Africa. So the red, black, and green, and I'm a child of the late 60s, early 70s. So that was really big in my kind of like my mind's eye and my memories of this red, black, and green piece. And then this happy accident happened because all my text-based work is signed on the bottom with the tagline, VJ makes art for a better society. And so that tagline is the tagline that's at the bottom in yellow. And when I was mocking this up, I was thinking, oh, this doesn't want to be red or green, right? It wants to be something different. And then I chose yellow, and then making the connection to Ghana. So red, black, green, yellow are the colors of the Ghanaian flag. And so then that makes my connection to Ghana, to the place of disembarkation, the last place that many of my enslaved ancestors saw before taking that forced migrated journey across the Atlantic to the Americas. So there's that Ghana connection with the colors, and then also looking at, and someone mentioned this before, we need to understand where we are in Virginia. Virginia is the birthplace of enslaved people in this country, right? So we have this unique position in Virginia, and I love that you did this show with Virginia artists, and that this kind of theme is coming through, that we need to talk about this position a little bit more than we are. The 1619 project was great, but we need to continue that conversation, right? And I think that with Black Lives Matters, with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, the protests that came about, with the Lee statue in Richmond, and also the thing that's the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville in 2017. All of, as Malcolm said, the chickens are coming home to roost. So all of these elements are coming back into play that I think that we conscious people in the state of Virginia need to interpret that a little bit more than we are. Sorry, the educator is coming out of me.
No, it's amazing. I think we all are really loving hearing all of this and just listening to you. We have one more question on the docket, and then we can open it up to the audience. But so now that you're in your current artist residency, what are you currently working on? And do you feel like your work is shifting toward a specific direction as you continue this program? Is it, diverging from what you were doing before, or are you becoming more focused on one of the elements of what you're working on or have been working on?
Well, I'm here at a residency that has a print studio as part of the facilities. So I'm working on a piece that is a variation of a work that I did before, one of my first pieces of art, which is called The Language of Invisibility. And that was a piece that is Black felt bulletin boards with Black text on it. So it's like these languages of my invisible being, how I have been invisibilized by society. As a Black woman, I am just like pushed out of the way or totally ignored. And so I took several languages, like my quotes about my invisibility, and placed it on the Black text on these Black boards. So it's that kind of subliminal element of being almost rendered illegible or invisible. And I'm doing a silkscreen version of that where I'm screening Black text on Black paper. and then also using white text to superimpose a different message that comes across. And so what I've done is I've expanded that language of invisibility piece to about, I think I have 15 phrases that I've expanded the element on. And eventually I want to be able to do an entire wall of these kind of like broadsides of invisibility. So that's what I'm working on here. But I guess it's like, you know, most artists have many things in the hopper. So I have a lot of projects like in my mind, and my iPhone is full of like these ideas for projects that I want to do. But it's like a double-edged sword, right, with artists. We've got all these ideas, but we need to focus in order to complete one at a time. So I am trying to stay focused on this. My residency ends in about 3 weeks. So I'm like a little bit, you know, not panicking, but anxious, because I want to get a significant part of this project done and bring it back to Virginia, because I have a show in Danville that opens in mid-April.
Amazing. Is that, first of all, I wanted to know if you had a website we could direct people to, or anything online that people can read more about what you do, just because I feel like there's a lot of info.
Sure. So I'm going to pop my website in the chat right now, unless Shree's already done it.
I haven't done it.
Okay.
And I also see that people are asking for the show details for your show in Danville.
Okay. Yeah, it's at, okay, so there's that. The show in Danville, I don't have all the particulars yet, but it's at the Danville Museum of Art and History. And it opens, I think, April 18th or 19th. But if you go to their website, and it's the Danville Museum, you know, this is the beautiful thing about the, you know, the internet, and you can be on Zoom and then also just pull this up. So this is the other great thing about where I am, and another issue that we need to resolve in this country. So I have great internet here, right? I don't have that at home. I live in Bedford. You know, Leslie was talking about living in the boonies. I live in the boonies. Bedford is in the middle of the state, at the base of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Beautiful, but very isolated. I do not have internet at home. I access internet at home through my personal hotspot on my iPhone. And even though I pay for unlimited service, I only get 15 gigabytes a month at high speed, right? So I have to go to, I have a studio in downtown Bedford. So I go to my studio to basically to do some work, but mainly to access the internet. So this is an issue that, you know, in this country, why doesn't everyone have high speed internet in this country? It's like a utility. And now that we're all online now, it's like, it's a prerequisite. And we know when we talk about net neutrality and disenfranchised bodies who usually don't have access to these things are usually Black and brown bodies. So I am definitely like, I am a Black Appalachian artist with no internet. That needs to be one of my broadsides.
And it definitely does.
I can't wait to see the Black on Black pieces. Might have to make a road trip to Danville.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, so I have a question that came up for me, and I selfishly want to hear the answer to this. Is what draws you to text-based media? I love it. And I've been trying to find ways to use text to tell stories where you don't have to add more than that, where you can like actually play with the way the text looks in order to tell your story.
Yeah. Part of it is the result of graduating from a visual and critical studies program in California. And that's when I got my master's about, what is this, about 5 years ago. And so it's this element of understanding how to critically examine visual culture, but then also how to talk about it, right? And how to write about it. And so in some ways, it's like I learned this new skill of being able to write well and to dissect visual culture, which was great, you know, to write a heady paper about, you know, whatever, you know, social ramifications of the color Black, you know, on TV. But at the same time, it allowed me to kind of dissect myself and also understand all of these issues that I had been subjected to, but didn't have a voice or a way to voice it. I didn't have the language to articulate it. And once I got that training from grad school and was able to look at it visually and then articulate it literally, like in literary circumstances, it gave me this tool to say, okay, fine, I've got this text. And then I got introduced to Virginia Center of the Book, which is a letterpress program. And so I've always liked type, right? So it's this whole idea of like, how do you intersect these loves? So this newfound love of expressing myself in literary terms. And then how do you then broadcast that? And that's the beauty of the broadsides, right? Because movable type is a thing that changed, is technology, back in the day, and it changed how we communicated as humans in a way, right? And especially as Americans, and like putting those big newspapers out, putting broadsides out. I mean, even the idea of the runaway slave ads, right? That was a way of conditioning people, of getting information out. But then there were also abolitionists who used broadsides to warn the enslaved people of the ills that could be in their environment. So it's this method of communication that allows me to tell my story in a very plain way that connects to more people than maybe some visuals can. Because I'm all about accessibility, right? I want my language to be accessible. And so with the Black on Black, renders it a little bit inaccessible but you have to go up and see it, right? I love when my work draws people in. So going back to, the piece at McGuffey, I don't know if people noticed like that river, there's a river that's embossed in those 4 panels, and you can barely see it in that photograph, but it's to be evocative of the shape of the Rivanna, which is a very nice kind of sinewy river that flows through Charlottesville. And so I kind of like abstractedly mimicked that along those 4 panels. So you get that kind of embossed element that runs through it.
I was just going to bring that up as a comment right before you said that. I was like, just like the river in these. Yeah, perfect.
Do we have any questions from the audience for Veronica? Please feel free to add it to the chat box.
Oh, good. Catrice sees the river. Thanks, Ramona.
There's a lot of wonderful
Lisa,
comments.
Truly.
Hi to Lisa Drain, and she's still online.
All right, I'm not seeing any questions. I see some awesome comments. She says she loves you.
I see it. Love you too.
Yes, thank you, everybody. This did take a little bit longer than we were anticipating, but it was hard. It was hard not to just hear so many amazing stories. So I'm just so glad everybody stuck around, and thank you, Veronica. You really carried out. Kori mentioned earlier that you kind of tied up all the themes and things from the entire talk in a really amazing way.
Well, thank you. I like doing that. So I'm glad it succeeded.
Perfect timing.
Once again, that's the exhibit designer in me. What we do is we tell stories and we interpret curators' ideas for the public, and so that is one of my loves.
We have a quick little question about your typeface choice. Is that something you think a lot about, or?
Yes, it is, definitely. And this one, I can't remember what this one is, but it was a cognizant choice, and it probably is because of the thickness of it. It has to be readable from afar. And just to give you a little hint of what's coming next, on the pieces that I'm silk screening now, I was introduced to a font called Hyperlegible, and it was created by the Braille Institute to make reading this text really legible. And so and this is going to be the text I use forever on this Language of Invisibility series, because I love the juxtaposition of using a font called Hyperlegible to render illegible, invisible messages. So I'm really excited about that. So yeah, font plays heavily in the decisions for my work.
Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for being here. And thank you to all of our artists that have stuck around throughout this whole talk too. It's so great to see you guys supporting one another and sticking it out and staying through this talk. And it's been such a wonderful experience because I know we could probably, even in our, like, we did a test run and we were all just like talking to each other for like about 30, 40 minutes before we even talked about what the artist talk was about. So, so I can see how this happened.
Yes.
You had a preview.
Yeah. But before we close for the day, I just want to take a quick moment to share some of the upcoming events that are also related to the water exhibition. And a lot of them are on our website, but our first or most upcoming event is this weekend, Saturday, March 13th from 5:30 to 8:30 p.m. We're going to be hosting in-person appointments for a photography session with Kori Price. Kori will be inviting the community to take part in a portrait series to explore their connection to the first enslaved Africans who arrived at Point Comfort in 1619. The portrait sessions are available at $40 per session, and half of the proceeds of this project will be going to the Fountain Fund, which is a local organization which provides low-interest loans and supports formerly incarcerated people who are working to successfully re-enter their communities. If you're interested in signing up or learning more, you can take a look at the link on our website. And next week, Tuesday, March 16th from 5:30 to 6:30, we'll be hosting a virtual prose and poetry reading with Adrienne Oliver, who's going to share some of her written work and speak about some of the themes that she explores in her work. And Kori will actually be moderating this talk. You can also sign up on our website for this one. And we also have, and this date actually changed as of like an hour before this talk, but Larry D. Giles' poetry reading will be on Sunday, April 4th from 2 to 3 p.m., which is updated on our website, not on these slides. And last event for the Water Show is Saturday, March 27th from 4 to 5. We're hosting a short film screening of 2 short films by Ellis Finney, and then a director Q&A afterwards. Ellis is a student and is a senior at JMU University or James Madison University, and is going to be sharing some work that's actually been playing on a loop in our gallery space. And we're going to spend a little bit of time at least being able to hear the audio more clearly. And the water exhibition is up until the end of this month, till March 28th. And you can still come see the exhibition during McGuffey Art Center's public hours, which are Wednesday through Sunday from 1 to 5 p.m. We are doing special tours for small groups who are interested in taking a tour of the exhibition, guided by our curation team members. So if you're interested in attending a tour, you can email us. Our email is listed on the main website, but it's mcguffeyrei@gmail.com. And the exhibition is also on display online at mcguffeyartcenter.com. I sped through all of those things so I could get you guys out of here.
Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you all so much